Hey everybody, I'm Zach. We've been over this several weeks in a row. But this week I'm going to be giving the reporter presentation on the engine performance experiment. Don't know what that was. Continuing. Give a little recap about the experiment. First thing we did was ensure all the hoses and everything were connected. We made sure that the big hole in the exhaust was closed up and whatnot. Set up our electronics, turned on the engine, and at that point we ran 8 different tests. 4 were constant load with a variable speed, 4 were constant speed with a variable load. Here's a picture in case you forgot what it looked like. Notes to be taken on this image is that it's a terrible assembly drawing. You cannot tell what goes where. You'll need that next year. So for a brief background, horsepower is equal to torque times your RPM over 5,252. Torque's in foot-pounds, your speed's in RPMs. Torque is a moment arm. It's a force times a radius or a distance. F, your force being applied, R, your radius. So some trends that you should be able to expect for a constant load. If you vary your speed, then your increase in speed should correlate directly to an increase in horsepower. For a constant speed, variable load, if you increase your load, you're increasing the force being applied to at your distance, so you're increasing your torque, and you will also increase your horsepower. This might answer your question you just had, but your horsepower should eventually outgrow your torque due to air intake issues that you'll have as you increase your RPMs. Higher RPMs, it becomes harder to fill the volume displacement with air. Applications, constant loads, variable speeds, cars, boats, the typical everyday, engine-based items that we see. Constant speed, variable load would be more things like conveyor belts, manufacturing-based items, elevators and ski lifts. And it's important to note that nothing up here and nothing you'll find in real life is actually going to be a constant load variable speed or a constant speed variable load. For example, a car is not a constant load. You're constantly burning off the fuel that you're using to propel yourself with, so your load is always changing, even though it's really small. And if you're a constant speed variable load, you can vary your load and theoretically should not get changes in speed, but your change in load is going to have effects on your speed, even though it will be very minute. So from there, started to do some calculations, and this lab did a very poor job of explaining what we were actually doing. It basically said, take the data you get from the experiment and make plots. So I took that data and I made some plots. They all looked similar to what Riley and Nick got. Same thing for the constant speed. And we even got the random error on the first slide the same. From there, you're supposed to start doing calculations. This is not what you're typically supposed to do for this class, and nobody follows suit, but I had a lot of issues figuring out what I was supposed to do with this lab because it was very poorly written. For example, this was in the lab on a page that had equations. And while some of these things were defined, that is nowhere on that page, so I had no idea what it was. If you look at the data you get from the computer, it's in there, so you're just plugging it in. But that's poor practice when you're doing anything professionally, so don't do that. Additionally, F is up there. I have no earthly idea what that force is supposed to be. I somewhat assume that it is supposed to be the force that is giving you your torque, or it could be the force on the cylinder head. However, I have no way of going and finding either one of those things because I could not find a radius for my moment arm to calculate the force that way, nor did I know how to relate that to the cylinder head. And the reason for that is because I've never taken a class on internal combustion engines, taken thermo, but we did not cover this in depth. And also, it was not greatly defined in the lab manual. Ooh. So that's where my complications arise. As I was saying, what is F? I have no idea. I know it's a force being applied to the cylinder and or to the shaft, but I have no idea how to find it. Writing of units was also very irritating. This is that quantity that I said wasn't defined in the lab manual, but was in the data we got. It's pounds per horsepower, and that dash is supposed to be per hour. However, I think it's important to note, when doing something like this, if you do the math, A over B divided by C over D gives you A over B times C over D. So in the case that you end up with something along the lines of this, I have no way of knowing if this is pounds per horsepower minus hour or per hour. An easy way to solve all of that would have been to put that in parentheses so I know that this is pounds per horsepower and then that whole thing per hour. So it's just something important to note when you're doing stuff like this. Avoid errors like that. It's very confusing and makes your work hard for other people to work with. That brings me to this. This isn't exactly what was in the lab manual, but in my opinion, it's close enough. I couldn't make sense of what they had in there, and I didn't have an abundance of time to go and research everything in there to do anything with it. So I did do what calculations I could. My conversion efficiency is pretty far off. I have no idea what was going on there. Yeah. And my mechanical efficiency, I got 15.5 just because that's a pretty easy calculation. What's the point is not, so to say, making fun of this lab or anything of the sort. It's more along the lines of the calculations they were asking us to do in this lab were based upon measurements taken by the lab instrumentation. So by calculating your power, all you were really doing was checking the accuracy of that instrumentation. You weren't really doing anything else other than that. So I didn't really see what the reasoning behind it was. And then lastly, if anybody wants to, 9 a.m. Thursday, Frank Walker Room, we're doing our senior design presentation. So, anybody have questions?
You think this lab is useful?
I think it needs to be rewritten. There's a lot more useful things that you could do with internal combustion engines than this.
Did you know that the, never mind. You go ahead.
Yeah, I recommend that.
I sat down, I was up till 2 last night doing other things, and started looking at this. Looked at it for an hour, got nowhere, woke up this morning, continued looking at it pretty much all day, and it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. I don't have a background in internal combustion engines, and I don't have the time to go and get a background in internal combustion engines to do the lab.
So those formulas were confusing.
They were just,
What else?
yeah, I didn't know what BSCF was. I looked it up and I got a definition, but it wasn't extremely helpful. And I think there's a BEMF or something like that. It's just, if you haven't heard of stuff like that, like if I were to come up here and start writing rhythms in 4/4 time, half of you probably wouldn't know what 4/4 time is, and you wouldn't know how to read music. So for me to tell you guys to come up here and do that, you wouldn't get very far. It's kind of, I guess, something I can see symmetry in. Does that make sense? So no one else has any more questions?
There's no point of asking questions.